Victoria. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. Good to see you again, Victoria.
Yes, great to see you. And since we have chat last time, I have gone on and check out your album, New Perspectives, which you have now released some sheet music in harp column music. And I thought I would talk to you about it because I found them to be quite different than what I usually play. And there's a very distinctive sound about it that I found very lively and interesting. Tell us about the music from this album that you can play on the harp.
Yeah, so the music that I chose to transcribe from this album is all really Latin American inspired, and each piece has its kind of different backstory. But all the pieces you can feel have this baseline syncopation and groove that drives it to its climax and makes it, for me, really memorable. So from Legacy all the way through New Perspectives, you feel this syncopation and lively, organic energy that happens. I definitely feel like all these pieces are inspired by my studies of folk traditions from Venezuela as well as Paraguay and working with harpists from both those countries. And this kind of idea that the right hand and left hand are in a conversation versus playing in unison or just in harmony. So it's kind of something that I fell in love with as a child, and it just became a part of how I played and then part of how I composed. So it's been a really fun journey in that way.
Before we dig into the meat and potato of this conversation, tell us about the harp that is necessary to play this music.
Thank you for asking that question. I think it's really, as harp players, we kind of sometimes gloss over that information, but it's so helpful when we have maybe a harp without levers or only a flatsicle, which is what they're called when the harpsicles that just have a B, C, and F lever. So for a number of the pieces, you could probably modify it to play on a flatsicle. But there's a few pieces like the piece named Crazy Day as well as Legacy, where you start out and you just need a C sharp and a B flat, nothing else. However, mid song, we actually changed to include a G sharp in Legacy, and then we have one D sharp in Crazy Day. So you don't have to include those, but it would be nice to be able to have that. So ideally, it would be a fully levered lever harp of, for some of them, 26 strings may be sufficient. For most of them, 36, 34 to 36 would be really helpful. And then for pedal harp, they all work. I don't really set different keys for different octaves because I really like moving between keys based on key centers versus just putting up different different configurations per octave. So it should work on a fully levered 34, 36, or a pedal harp, and some for the harpsicles.
Thanks for sharing that. And
Yeah.
let's get into one of the songs to talk about. Perhaps let's start with syncopation, because I found that to be quite challenging sometimes to approach. What's your thoughts on that, and what are some of your tips and tricks in approaching syncopation?
Yeah, I recently did a workshop on syncopation. What I find I do and find most helpful is before I do anything, looking at how the left hand and the right hand interact. And in some cases, I will draw a line. If the bass line, for example, plays, but the melody is not playing, I will draw a line to show where the left hand is happening, but the right hand is silent. So you can see where the syncopation is going on. Or in some cases, for some people, it helps to draw a line between where the notes line up together. So it might be on the downbeat and then beat 3, for example. So that way you can visually see how the syncopation happens. So you might start out with a downbeat with both hands, and then you'll play the left hand, then the right hand, then the left hand, and then together again. So sometimes I verbally say it together, right, together. So you might have the left hand. So that's me playing at the tempo of the piece, and that is an intro to a piece from Venezuela titled Moliendo Cafe. But what I was speaking about in terms of how you think about it, I might go like this: together, together, left, right, left, right. So as I'm playing, I'll talk about it so that I can know what hands to use, and I hear myself saying that so I don't get confused. And then once the verbal has happened enough, you're able to then keep it in your fingers. Ultimately, knowing how you learn, if it's visual, doing some drawing. If it's auditory, saying it as you're playing. For others, it really helps to divide the hands up. So with a lot of the pieces in this set of repertoire, you'll have the left hand doing a lot of syncopation. And if you can just practice playing that syncopation in the left hand and internalizing, if that works for you, I find that incredibly helpful, because once you've memorized, you have muscle memory of that rhythm in your left hand, you can start to integrate the right hand. And if counting feels like too much, you can actually almost make it a automatic pilot once you've practiced it enough, and then integrate the right hand into it, and they'll start to lock because you've already learned the left hand. The right hand just becomes an additional piece to include. But I know that was a lot of information right there, but it's really important to know how you learn, and then that way how to approach the syncopation slowly and consistently.
And I'm a more visual learner, so I found the drawing a line on the sheet music to be a very helpful trick for me because I can visually see it how it happens on the paper.
Exactly, exactly.
And what other techniques are common in the pieces that you're presenting in this collection of music?
Great question. So I was looking at Legacy, which is one of my favorite pieces. I actually made a music video a number of years ago that's still on my website. And a lot of Latin American music, instead of the focus of having the hand facing downwards towards the sound box, you actually bring your hand upwards, facing towards the neck of the harp. And I'm going to show you briefly how the opening passage in Legacy uses that shape of your hand to give you this more percussive feeling. So I'm going to play that intro part, and then I will then show one other useful technique that I actually use in a lot of the different pieces in this set of works to create a dampening effect. But first, just for the placement of the hand, here's the intro to Legacy. So as you probably noticed, instead of placing my hand downwards, I actually had it up, which that enables me to have quick access to using my thumb in a more staccato tone versus a fuller, rich tone that you get by plucking and facing downwards. So I found that technique helps me a lot in just achieving that passage. And similarly, later on in the work, in about measure 40 or so, I have this harmonic muffle that I've found is really fun, because you get the harmonic tone on the harp, but instead of having a full rich tone that we're familiar with, you actually end up getting percussion and the harmonic tone. So I'm just going to demonstrate that passage now, and you can see how I'm actually playing a harmonic, but instead of what we are used to where you pluck it and then you release slowly and let it ring like a bell, you actually stay on the harp to get a mixture of percussion and harmonic. So that's the actual tone you get, and it gives this really lovely percussive bell in essence.
Yeah, and I think that's what gives the music such a lively feeling. You're really feeling the beat and you want to move with it, and that's how you're gonna achieve it is by actually playing your hand a little differently to achieve a different sound, isn't it?
Exactly, exactly. It's always the experiment to find the the tone quality that will support a certain passage. And you'll find that throughout most of the pieces in this collection. There's that section that includes that to really give a drive and a different timbre simultaneously.
And I'm going to ask you this question because I think a lot of us sometimes challenge with it. We're quite good at following the music to a T, but when we play it, we don't get the right groove. How precise do we have to follow the time signature and the notes that are on the music, or is there some room to be a little bit more free when playing these music?
Great question. So easy to say, well, that's what the sheet said. And in some cases, the composer will leave notes for you in terms of, okay, make this swing, or this is the tempo of this certain quarter note or half note. on all the pieces, I've offered audio recordings, and I would suggest even listening through to get a sense for how the overall arcing of the phrases are and the motion of the piece, but also noticing where to accent in terms of. I recently had a coaching on this piece, Legacy, with a trio that I work with. And one of the main comments was bringing out the downbeat because we have so many notes on the harp, so many strings, and we can play so many notes at the same time. We sometimes forget about which are important at a given measure. So I would say really accenting the downbeats and then listening to the recordings and noticing where the phrases are going because it's hard to indicate that on a sheet of music. All we can really tell you is the recommended tempo and the note names and the fingering and the placements, right? Which are all essential as well, but they don't necessarily give it the musical experience that we want to deliver. So yeah, it's a mixture of listening and then over time, you'll probably find the first couple pieces you try, you're kind of just getting used to getting that syncopation. And then over time, you'll start to hear it musically and be able to put more of your own joy into it. And that will translate to uh, a more engaged conversation between both hands that looks fluid, right? Even when it may be challenging.
And let's talk about your title track, New Perspectives, which I also quite enjoy. What are some of the tips and tricks and thoughts behind playing this piece of music?
Yes. So given we've kind of talked about the overall collection, each piece has some similar rhythms that you'll find throughout the collection. But New Perspectives, in about measure 12 or 15, you start with this syncopation. You introduce this, or rather, this rhythmic pulse section in the right hand. And I just want to play that briefly to show how I relax my hand and just pluck the strings, but to keep them essentially like a musical metronome in F sharp major. So I bring that first piece up in that section up really to remind us to play a clear downbeat in the left hand and then just to relax our wrists as we're playing the right hand to get this really, it's the first moment where we introduce a tempo and this rhythm that's driving the piece forward. And then it dives into a very engaged melody on page 2. But it's really important to kind of set that first initial tone of rhythm and drive before we get into the bulk of the work.
And I really
Uh,
noticed how different your two hands were. One is way more relaxed than the left.
yeah, so you want to really keep the more relaxed, the more you can keep it consistent and controlled, but not build tension, as we all know, which is a really important facet of playing harp. Uh, and then the one other comment I want to make is when the main melody comes in, we get that syncopation between the right and left hand again. And remember how to either counting is a little harder in this piece because there's 16th notes, there's eighth notes, quarter notes, syncopation. But if you can line up where the notes are coming together and where they're happening separately and listen to the recording just for those sections, because you'll find that by listening, it may not look like that on the sheet and you may have interpreted it differently just by looking at the music and lining up the syncopation or when the two hands play together. But once you listen to the recording, you'll then hear the relationship and probably have an easier time reproducing it on your harp. So it's always good to remember the two balance parts. And I think those are the main pieces. And in all of my works, I do have a section for improvisation. And the biggest thing to think about is really being clear on the downbeat. Because if you do play with a duo and you want to find a way to arrange these, you can. And these improvisation sections, you want to remember to play really clearly on those downbeats and really keep that momentum going with the syncopation. So again, the recordings are just a great place to start and listening to get ideas. I will say over the years, as I've played these pieces, I've adapted them and the rhythms have changed a little bit because as creatives, we always come up with new ideas as we're working on a piece or when we're working in an ensemble. But ultimately, being able to notice what are the tools in this piece that I think will be most important to bringing it fully to life in the way I want to, based on the recording and based on the sheet music, and then working your way through it with that in mind. So it's not just skiing all the notes, but really bringing to life the story that it's trying to tell, even if you don't know the exact story behind why I personally wrote it. So yeah, it's one of my favorite pieces to play, and I do have a trio arrangement, but this solo arrangement really gives so much for the lever harp in syncopation, as well as moving between moods, from rubato to introducing rhythm to introducing syncopation. So I'm excited to have others play it.
Yeah, it's really fun when we're able to play something complex. And I think something I have to remind myself is these things don't just come overnight. I think my teacher has always suggested, yeah, listen to other playing it and then leave with it for a little bit, and then you will start to give it your own life. So I think these pieces to me, it will be those where, I might be end up spending a couple of months with them to, just to get to know the music a little bit, hear how you play it, and then I might perform it on my own just to get a taste of how I want to interpret it. And I'm pretty sure it might come out slightly differently, but it will still be pretty fun.
Exactly, exactly. And the one other thing I wanted to mention was fingering, because we will sometimes get a new piece of music and notice the fingering suggested by the composer. And that might work really well for us and then go with it. But when it doesn't, know that you have the option to change it. And as I'm going through my own classical degree, I'm constantly refining my playing and my fingering choices. And then I come back to these pieces and realize that a fingering choice that made sense 2 years ago could be modified to make the notes clearer. Because when you have, for example, a 16th notes or a triplet, and you want to really bring out every note, notice what finger naturally doesn't come as clear and how can you bring it out. So maybe it means accenting the two, even though you don't want the two to sound louder, but by accenting it, then you can hear it with the rest of the notes in that phrase. So really notice what fingering will enable you to make every voice be heard well, and that will then bring out everything else that's most important about this piece, which is the relationship, the syncopation, as well as the rubato sections that are equally important.
That's great. And where can we find these music?
Yes, so Harp Column Music is where I recently released it, as well as Rock Inc. But what you can do is just go to my website, and on the main page, you will see solo harp compositions, and below it, a link to both locations. So you just click on it, and it'll bring you to the URL.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to playing some of these pieces myself, and I hope our audience will have a blast learning them and playing them as well.
I'm very excited to share them with the world of harpists.
Thank you so much for coming back, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Likewise, thank you so much for featuring me, Victoria. It's such a pleasure to speak with you as well as share about these pieces that are so dear to my heart.
Love to have you anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.